I had been living in my duplex for over a year. It was one of those older houses that had been split into two separate living spaces, one upstairs, one downstairs. My sister, Claire, rented the downstairs unit, while I had the top floor. It worked out well since we had our own space, and she was usually staying over at her boyfriend's place across town. That night, I was completely alone. I had turned off all the lights except for the glow of the television, watching some old horror flick. The open layout of my apartment meant that my couch sat in the middle of the space, leaving a large, dimly lit area behind me. I tried not to think about it, but as the movie played, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more times than I'd like to admit. Eventually, I shook off the unease, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed. Sleep came quickly, but it didn't last long. At exactly 1:12 a.m., I woke up, heart racing for no reason. The room was silent except for the faint creaks of the old house settling. I almost rolled over and went back to sleep until I heard it. A voice. Ben. It came from downstairs. I sat up straight, instantly alert. It was Claire's voice, calling my name. My first thought was that she had come home unexpectedly, but something felt off. The tone was strained, as if she were calling for help but trying not to be too loud. I swung my legs over the bed and stepped into the dark hallway. The only light was from the street lamps outside, filtering through the blinds. Claire. I called out groggily. No response. I made my way toward the staircase. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended. My heart was thumping now, and a sick feeling crept into my stomach. The downstairs apartment was completely dark. Claire. Story 2. I grew up in a small, quiet town where nothing ever really happened. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and neighbors waved at each other from their porches. I was 14 when I learned that the safety I had always assumed was nothing more than an illusion. That night, my mom was working an overnight shift at the hospital, and my dad was out of town on a business trip. My older brother had recently left for college, which meant for the first time in my life, I was truly alone in the house. To be honest, I kind of enjoyed it. No parents meant I could stay up as late as I wanted, eat whatever junk food I felt like, and watch scary movies without my mom making a comment about them, rotting my brain. That evening, my friend Olivia had come over. We'd watched a couple of movies, raided the kitchen for snacks, and hung out in my room for a few hours before her dad came to pick her up. By the time she left, it was past midnight. The house felt different without another person in it. Too quiet. I locked the front door, checked the back, and made sure every window was closed, just in case. Then I went upstairs to my bedroom and turned on my TV. I wasn't tired yet, so I figured I'd watch a few episodes of something before passing out. That's when I heard it. A sound from outside. It was subtle at first, just the faint scrape of something moving across the wooden porch. I turned down the volume on the TV and listened. Silence. Maybe I imagined it. I was about to turn the volume back up when I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of a chair dragging across the deck. I swallowed hard. My bedroom window overlooked the back porch. I should have been able to see whatever was making the noise. Slowly, I got out of bed and crept toward the window. My fingers twitched as I reached for the blinds, hesitating for a moment before finally pulling them apart just enough to peek outside. There was a man sitting in one of the patio chairs. He was facing the house, looking directly at my window. I felt my breath catch in my throat. His face was shadowed by the dim porch light, but I could see enough. He wasn't moving, just sitting there with his hands folded in his lap. I blinked hard, convincing myself that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, he was still there. And he was smiling. A deep, unsettling grin that didn't belong on any normal person's face. I jerked away from the window, heart hammering. My first thought was that maybe it was Olivia messing with me, but she had left over 30 minutes ago. It didn't make sense. I grabbed my phone and quickly texted her. Please tell me you're outside right now. She responded almost instantly. What? No, I'm home. Why? I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to keep myself from full-blown panic. I turned off my bedroom light, hoping that if I stayed quiet, he'd leave. Maybe he was just some drunk guy who had wandered onto the wrong property. Maybe if he thought no one was home, he'd get bored and go away. But then I heard the doorknob rattle. A sharp, deliberate sound that sent ice straight through my veins. He was trying to get inside. I forced myself to move, tiptoeing to my bedroom door and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my phone. I wanted to call the police. I should have called the police. But I was terrified that if I made a sound, he'd hear me. Then came another noise. The slow creak of the back door swinging open. I froze. I knew I had locked it. I had checked. And yet, somehow he was inside. I could hear his footsteps, unhurried and deliberate, moving through the kitchen. Then, something even worse. A soft, wheezing laugh. Like he was enjoying this. I swallowed the whimper that threatened to escape my throat. My mind was screaming at me to move, to do something, but my body refused to listen. The footsteps grew louder, moving toward the stairs. And then, silence. I strained to hear, but the house had gone completely still. No footsteps, no breathing, just an endless, suffocating quiet. I don't know how long I stood there, my back pressed against the bedroom wall, waiting for something to happen. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he had left. Maybe he had realized there was nothing worth stealing. And then, as if reading my thoughts, a voice came from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there." My blood turned to ice. I didn't recognize the voice. It was low, raspy, almost playful. I clamped a hand over my mouth, my entire body trembling. The doorknob twisted. Once, twice. Then, a single, deliberate knock. I felt my knees go weak. And then, nothing. No more knocking. No footsteps retreating. No sound at all. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, barely breathing, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I worked up the courage to inch toward the door and press my ear against it. Silence. Had he given up? I reached for my phone with shaky hands and texted Olivia again. "There's someone in my house." She didn't even hesitate. "Call the cops." I knew she was right. I should have called them the second I saw him on the porch. I took a deep breath and dialed 911. The operator picked up almost immediately. I whispered into the phone, barely able to get the words out. "There's someone in my house." I gave her my address, my voice barely above a breath. She told me to stay put, that officers were on the way. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Minutes crawled by. Then, finally, red and blue lights flashed outside my window. I heard the front door burst open. The sound of officers moving through the house, clearing each room. One of them knocked on my bedroom door and called out, "Police." I barely managed to unlock the door with my shaking hands. The officer took one look at my face and asked if I was hurt. I shook my head. They searched the entire house. The back door was still closed and locked. There was no sign of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. As if he had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. What I heard. The officer stayed with me until my mom got home. She was frantic, demanding to know why I hadn't called sooner. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. That night still haunts me. Because sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can still hear it. That slow, wheezing laugh. And I don't know if he ever really left. Story 3. I was 10 years old when I learned what true fear felt like. It was a Friday night, and my family was supposed to be together. My mom, my dad, my older brother, and my little sister. Our usual routine was ordering pizza, watching a movie, and just enjoying the start of the weekend. But that night, everything changed. The phone rang at exactly 9:47 p.m. I was in my room playing a video game, immersed in the flashing lights of the screen, when I heard my mom's voice from the hallway. It was shaking. I paused the game, listening closer. She was crying. My dad's voice was lower, more controlled, but I could hear the urgency in it. Something was wrong. I peeked out of my bedroom, just in time to see my parents rushing to grab their coats. My little sister, barely 5 years old, was rubbing her sleepy eyes, confused. My mom looked at me, her face pale. "Jason, are you okay to stay here for a little while?" I frowned. "Where are you going?" My dad put a hand on my shoulder. "It's your brother. He got hurt. We need to go to the hospital." My stomach twisted. "Is he okay?" "We don't know yet," my mom whispered. Her voice cracked at the last word. I didn't want them to leave, but I knew I couldn't go with them. They were already worried enough without dragging me and my sister into a hospital emergency room. So I nodded. "Yeah, I'm okay." They hesitated for a second, then rushed out the door, my dad carrying my half-asleep sister in his arms. The door shut. The house was silent. I tried to distract myself, telling myself my brother was going to be fine. I went back to my game, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to the hallway, to the empty space where my parents had been. The house felt too big without them. Then, about an hour later, I heard it. The front door opened. I stiffened. I hadn't heard a car pull up. No footsteps outside. But the door was open. I muted the TV, listening hard. At first, there was nothing. Just silence. Then, the soft sound of footsteps. I felt my blood run cold. I got up slowly, inching toward my bedroom door. The hallway outside was dark. The only light was the blue glow from my TV. I peeked out over the upstairs banister. My heart stopped. There were 3 people standing in the living room. Tall, shadowy, unfamiliar. They weren't my parents. They weren't my brother. And they weren't supposed to be there. I sucked in a sharp breath and pulled back into my room, shutting the door as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking. I reached for my phone, but my fingers were clumsy, numb with panic. I dialed 911. The call barely rang before a woman's voice answered. 911. What's your emergency? I pressed the phone against my ear, whispering, there are people in my house. Are you somewhere safe? I turned and looked at my closet. It was small, full of clothes and old toys, but it was the only hiding spot I had. I think so, I whispered, already moving toward it. Stay on the line, she said. Police are on their way. I climbed into the closet, shutting the door behind me, curling into the tightest ball I could manage. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they'd hear it from downstairs. Then, I heard the stairs creak. I clamped a hand over my mouth. They were coming up. The 911 operator was still talking, but I barely heard her. Every single nerve in my body was focused on the footsteps. Slow, heavy. One of them was in the hallway now. I could hear them moving toward my parents' room, then my sister's. Then, my door opened. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing myself deeper into the clothes, into the shadows. The floor creaked. Someone was in my room. I held my breath, waiting for the closet door to rip open. I could already imagine it. Some stranger, some faceless shape looming over me, grabbing me, pulling me out into the darkness. But it didn't happen. Instead, the footsteps moved away, back down the hall, and then the front door shut. I stayed frozen in the closet for what felt like hours, the 911 operator still on the phone, trying to get me to respond. Finally, when I was sure they were gone, I forced myself to crawl out and look. The house was empty. The front door was still locked. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they searched the entire house. Every room, every closet. But there was no one. No signs of forced entry. Nothing missing. Nothing out of place. Except for one thing. The hallway closet door, right outside my bedroom, was open. And sitting inside, on the top shelf, was my brother's favorite baseball cap. The one he had lost weeks ago. The one that had been in his room the last time I saw it. I never slept alone in that house again. Even after my brother came home from the hospital, I never stopped wondering. Who were they? What did they want? And the worst question of all, why didn't they take anything, except the time to watch me?